Today, we're diving into a story that took nearly 4 decades to reach its conclusion. It all starts with a truly horrific crime, a family that's just shadowed, and then a legal fight that stretched across an entire generation. So how does a case like this finally come to an end? Let's get into the final chapter of the Mark Allen Geralds case.
Just let that sink in for a second. And no, that's not a line from a horror movie. That's the real-life trauma that Tressa Pettibone's 8-year-old son had to face when he got home from school on February 1st, 1989. That one absolutely devastating discovery kicked off a story that wouldn't see its final page written for almost 40 years.
So to really get the full weight of those 37 years, we're actually going to tackle this story a little differently. We're going to start at the very, very end with the final chapter. December 9th, 2025. For the state of Florida, that was the day the file was officially closed. But for the Pettibone family, this was the end of a marathon of legal battles, endless appeals, and just so much uncertainty. 37 years. I mean, just think about that. That's an entire generation. For Tressa Pettibone's family, this wasn't just some number on a case file. It was a lifetime spent waiting for the legal system to finally run its course. So this timeline kind of lays it all out for us, right? It starts with the murder back in '89. Then a quick death sentence in 1990, but that gets overturned. 2 years later, he's resentenced to death, and that's what kicked off decades of appeals. And the final twist in all this? In 2025, Geralds himself just stops fighting, which paved the way for the end. So, how did this all even begin? To really understand the next 37 years, we have to rewind. We're going all the way back to that day in February 1989 to see just how cold and calculated this attack really was. See, this was not some random act of violence. The killer, Mark Allen Geralds, was a carpenter. He'd actually worked inside the Pettibones' home, so he knew the family. About a week before the murder, he just so happened to run into Tressa and her kids at the local mall.
And during that conversation, Tressa just casually mentioned that her husband was out of town. Now, for most of us, that's just small talk. For Geralds, that wasn't small talk. That was an opportunity.
And this is where the planning gets truly chilling. Geralds turned to Tressa's little boy and just starts asking him questions. When's your dad going to be back? What time do you leave for school in the morning? What time do you get home? He was methodically, piece by piece, building a schedule for his attack.
Okay, so the crime was clearly calculated. But was the case against him any good? The answer is, oh yeah. I mean, despite all the years of legal battles, the physical evidence against Geralds was absolutely overwhelming from day one.
So investigators started following the evidence trail. They found some of the stolen jewelry at a pawn shop, and it was still stained with Tressa's blood. The plastic ties he used to bind her, they were a perfect match to a set they found in his car. The evidence was just undeniable, leading to convictions for murder, robbery, burglary, and grand theft auto.
But wait, if the case was so strong, what took 37 years? Well, this is where you enter the legal labyrinth. He was convicted and sentenced to death pretty quickly in 1990. But then the Florida Supreme Court, while they upheld the conviction, they threw out the sentence because of a legal error. So 2 years later, he's resentenced to death again. And that's what kicked off the next 3 decades of appeals. Until finally, in 2025, he just decided he was done fighting. And that decision, well, that brings us to the final moments of this whole story. The execution wasn't just an end for Mark Allen Geralds. It was a really significant event for the state of Florida, and of course for the family that had been waiting for this day for almost 40 years. At 6:15 p.m. on December 9th, Mark Allen Geralds was pronounced dead. The method was lethal injection, a very precise 3-drug protocol. First a sedative, so he's unconscious, then a paralytic, and finally a drug to stop his heart. It was a quiet, clinical end to a story that began with such violent chaos.
After the execution, a victim advocate read this statement from the Pettibone family. For them, this wasn't about revenge, it was about finality. It was about waking up the next day without that shadow of the legal system just hanging over them, a kind of peace they hadn't known for almost 4 decades.
And Geralds' execution was actually part of a much bigger story. He was the 18th person executed in Florida that year, and that number, 18, set a pretty grim new record for the state. It was the most executions in a single year since the death penalty was brought back in 1976. Which leaves us with this final question, doesn't it? The legal system, it can give you a verdict, it can give you a sentence, an execution, it can close a case file. But for the family left behind, for the people who had to live through those 37 years of waiting, does a legal ending ever truly bring closure?